We're going to do a little Q&A, and if anybody has questions, put your hands up, and we'll have whichever of our panelists, guests, answer. Any questions? Don't be shy. Yes. Reading?
I'm reading about 5 different works from my clients, and I'm behind on all of them.
I am reading The Queen of Blood by Sarah Beth Durst. I hope I'm saying her last name right. It's an epic fantasy, and the world building is really interesting. It's kind of epic fantasy environmental fiction. Basically, you have wood and earth and air spirits, and all they want to do is kill humanity for destroying their natural habitat. So, like I said, really interesting.
I'm deeply into The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, which is destroying me because I really want to be nowhere else but there. So it is absolutely stunning, and it's making me jealous every word I read of it. It's so good.
I'm actually rereading that now, and I've had conversations with people. I love rereading books. About every half dozen books I read, one of them, the next one will be something I've read before, whether 20 years ago or 5 years ago. I like revisiting books because we change. We change, and the way we respond to something will change, and a book has more than one thing to say to me. So right now I brought on the plate, I'm rereading Richard Russo's Empire Falls. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it about 15 years ago. Somebody once said nobody had ever written small-town America like Richard Russo, and he's delightful. He makes you laugh with phrasings almost as much as anyone I know. It's not the big belly laugh scene. It's the wry note attached at the end of a long sentence that puts the laugh there. And I'm having an enormously good time reading him.
I never only read one book at a time. I'm not a literary agent, so I don't have to read that 1,000 manuscripts a week. I'm reading Fierce Kingdom by Jen Phillips. Terrifying novel that takes place in the course of 3 hours in a zoo where a terrorist attack occurs. There's a mother and her son. Amazing novel. A Girl in the Ice by Robert Brinza, which is more UK-based thriller mystery. Dead City by Sean Platt and Johnny B. Truitt. Sort of a zombie place where you get dropped into a city and have to fend for your life, or you hunt zombies. That's what the rich people do. And Joanna Penn's How to Market a Book. So those are the 4 I have on the go right now.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? Come on, we've got to have questions. Don't have questions about what they're... Okay. How much time during the day do you actually spend doing your work, your craft?
It is a myth that writers write every single day. Because I certainly don't do that. Being a writer is kind of like running your own business. There's always advertising, blogging, social media, paperwork, taxes, accounting, all the other things that writers do. So I actually don't write every single day. When I'm working on a draft, if it's like the first draft of a book, then I try to do about 6,000 words a day. So probably 5 or 6 hours. But it just kind of depends what the deadlines are and what else I have going on. But yeah, quite a bit of time when I'm first starting out on a new project.
I'm a bit similar in that I sort of boil it down that I'm writing flat out 8 months of the year and doing the other stuff 4 months of the year, including touring around and stuff and researching. And when I'm writing, I'm there at my desk at 7:30 in the morning, and if it's first draft, I'm pretty much done by 1. Because it's and I've written probably about 2,500 words by then. Sometimes a lot more, sometimes less. But so yeah, when if it's second draft, you have to drive me from my hut with hounds, because I won't leave.
We all have our own methods. One of the reasons I have trouble with people saying how to write or what method to use is that over the years I've come to realize how remarkably personal and idiosyncratic any artistic endeavor is, and I think that's emerging as we go along the table. I learned a number of years ago about myself that I would sometimes have a day where I thought that I was the hottest, slickest writer on the planet Earth. It would roll out of my brain and onto the computer, and I would get up at the end of the day and come down and tell my wife we were having martinis and going out because I was the coolest thing alive. And then I would write nothing for the next 3 days. And what I learned over time is that I needed to let my conscious awareness catch up with where the subconscious had taken me, where the creative process had gone, because I don't outline, I'm not blocking everything out. So all those words needed to be processed over the next 2 or 3 days. And so I've learned that I won't actually go faster in the end result if I have a prodigiously effective day. So I'm a little bit like Chris. I'm starting early, and I don't get up until I've done a number of words and polished them, because I'm one of the people who polishes as I go several times in a day before I get up and say that's all right. So if I do 1,000, 1,200, God bless me, 1,500 words in a writing day, I'm a very happy camper. If I do more than that, I know I will pay a price for it in the next day. So that's about it. It's more a word count than an hours count. So I'm trying to get a certain minimum amount done in order to feel fit to interact with the rest of the human race the rest of that day.
I don't write every day. I write every day, but I don't write every day, and I'll explain that in a second. When someone asks me how long it takes to put a book together, I usually say 5 days or 7 days, but they're really, really, really long days. Those are 16-hour days where I do nothing but write. I get up, I start working about 5 in the morning. I break when I get called, okay, it's time to eat. Liz is really supportive about that. She'll make sure I have to stop and eat, and then she sends me back into the room. And then we occasionally, we'll have a couple meals together, maybe spend an hour just sort of talking, watching the news, whatever. And then she goes to bed, and then I write again until 2 or 3 in the morning. Then I kind of stumble, sleep for 3-4 hours, and go. Because when I'm in the thick of it, I am in the thick of it, and that's what I basically live and breathe. That's usually because the deadline to get the manuscript to the publisher is usually that 7 days from now. But I'm also doing research throughout, and even though I don't write every day, and I'm sure the same would be true for you guys as well, I am writing every day. Every single experience I have, every single thing I see. When I was on the train yesterday heading downtown, I'm watching people, I'm listening to conversations, and that is me writing passively, because I'm absorbing all of that information that may or may not become an element of a character or a setting or a scene. And so I am writing every single day. Up here, there's a little imaginary person like banging away on a typewriter, an old-fashioned typewriter, not a computer, and storing those scenes. So that's the writing every day that I do all the time, even now. It's getting sorted.
Can I just sorry? I just wanted to add slightly to that. I love that Martin Amis said that just because he's lying on a sofa watching a soccer game doesn't mean he's not writing. And the other one about the young couple, they've just had their first baby, and it's 3 in the morning. I really appreciate this one. And the baby starts crying, and the wife elbows him and says, "It's your turn." He goes, "Shh, I'm working."
The same story as John Cheever.
Oh, yeah?
She said the hardest thing about writing is persuading my wife that when I'm lying back in my chair with my feet on the desk looking out the window, I'm working.
Yeah.
Same story.
Yeah.
That sounds like fun writing. Okay, do we have any? We have a question in the front.
The writers, do you always start at the beginning when you write? And I want to add Sam to this and ask him, when you're reading, do you always start at the beginning when you're reading the manuscripts that you get in, or will you pick it up somewhere in the middle?
That's a good question. I always start at the beginning because I want to pretend that I'm the editor that I'm sending it to. So the first thing that I'm looking for is some kind of emotional response to the page. If they, like, you've seen the two people that I represent that I love, I'm looking for some kind of cleverness or something about the voice. So the voice, an emotional feeling, and elements of story, some kind of intrigue, some kind of mystery. So if that's not there right away, I might start skimming. But usually by about page 30 or 40, if they haven't got me, it's a no.
Yeah, I'm like Guy. I don't plot very much at all. I just kind of think about the main character and the big turning points of the story, and then I just sit down and start writing. And it's just my process. I have to start at the beginning and write all the way through. I know a lot of people skip to their favorite kind of scenes to write first, or like if they know what the ending is. They'll do the last chapter first or whatever, but I have to go from A to B to C to D, and like no variation in that for me.
I'm with the king in Alice in Wonderland. When Alice says, "How do you tell a story?" he says, "Beginning at the beginning, go to the end, then stop." That's what I do.
It's actually an interesting question because I always start at what I think is the beginning. It doesn't always turn out to be the beginning. That in this book, Children of Earth and Sky, is a quick, brief anecdote relevant to what you're saying. The first chapter I wrote is, in fact, now chapter 2. And I realized when I finished it, I shouldn't say I realized, because you make the decision. I thought when I finished it that I created a character too interesting. Now that will sound paradoxical, but I knew that I was going to have 5 principal protagonists. And we are all, as readers, imprinted like ducklings by the first perspective, the first viewpoint character we encounter. It can be moved away from. The writer, if he or she has reasons to do so, can change that imprinting. But the first viewpoint we encounter, especially if they're compelling, owns the book, unless you work very hard to disabuse them of the notion they own the book. So I realized that I needed to reshift in my own thinking. It happened right away, as soon as I finished the chapter. I realized that this couldn't be the first chapter of the book. I needed to rethink and figure out what would be. And I didn't do it later. I couldn't keep going. I had to figure out what chapter 1 needed to be, so that I then wrote what turned out to be chapter 1. But I tricked myself with that book.
I'm very much like Guy. I start at the beginning, and I kind of write to the end. The beginning isn't always the beginning after I'm finished, but it's the place where I started. And I pants. I completely. For me, the thrill and joy of writing is that discovering. You know, you have characters, you have setting, you have situation, and you see what happens. I'm just waiting for them to tell me what's going on. About the only time I don't write linear from beginning to end, and I may shift things around later after the editor has a go at it, is if I experience what people believe, and I don't believe in it, but we believe is writer's block. When I get to a scene and I'm actually stuck, the way I get around writer's block is then I jump to that next scene, and then I try to backfill. And that usually breaks that block because I'm doing something different. And maybe I always believe that that's my subconscious telling me that maybe you don't need that thing in there, or maybe there's something wrong about that scene. So I use that as an indicator, but that's the only time I jump in time.
I'm just really curious because there seem to be so many books and things around that have impressed on me that I have to outline, I better jolly well know the 3-act structure and make sure I've got the hit points and the, you will see the diagram. But you guys, obviously amazing writers, prolific, you're not doing that. That's encouraging.
If I have a mantra, if I have a mantra in settings like this, I always say, treat what any writer tells you about how they write as purely anecdotal, not prescriptive. It's something I could have a T-shirt made, anecdote, not prescription, or something like that. Because if you had 4 different writers up here, it is very likely you would have a different set of guidance from them as to how they work. I have dear friends who cannot write word 1 until they have outlined through to the end of the book. The great, brilliant, magnificent Scottish historical fiction writer Dorothy Dunnett outlined all 6 volumes of her Lyman Chronicles before she wrote the first book, The Game of Kings. That she couldn't begin the novel, the first novel, until she had a general sense of where a 6-volume, 4,000-page series was going. And she and I would talk about this. I was lucky enough to have a friend in her later in her life, and she was baffled at how what we're talking about, that somebody could write a novel and find out where it was going. Graham Greene, the brilliant English novelist, used to say, and I quoted him to her, he said, if I know where my book is going, I get bored writing it. That the idea of the voyage of discovery, that cliche, which is always so for a reader if a book is any good, is for some of us, we're on that same voyage, that discovering. How do I know what I think until I see what I wrote? Is the wonderful phrase. I love that phrase. But that, the disparity you will find in how different people come at the creative process is something I keep reinforcing, because writers looking for guidance on how to are better off, I think, taking away, when you said it's encouraging, taking away the idea that there are a remarkable number of different ways to go about doing this thing we're all trying to do.
And I would say you just have to find the process that works the best for you. Like, I'm a morning person, so I'm on the computer by like 8 o'clock. And, I start writing, and then about 2 o'clock, I need to take a break. But then you have other people who are night owls who don't start writing till 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And maybe they write till 2 or 3 in the morning. So a lot of it is just figuring out, how you work best personally, whether it's writing or your day job or whatever you want to do, and just figuring out, sort of your own personality or your own quirks and your likes and your dislikes, and then sort of weaving your writing into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I need to find out what's happening as I go along. Writing historical fiction, of course, there are sometimes some benchmarks you're aiming for in terms of, a sequence of events that happen. You want to write about them. Fall of Constantinople, for example, all the things that happened. But I remember listening to John Irving on the radio. Now, I'm a big fan of John Irving's, except for The Fourth Hand, which stopped me reading him after that. But anyway, apart from that, wonderful, wonderful books. But he is like Dorothy Dunnett. He has everything planned. And he said, and then when I start writing, it's like I'm telling a story I already know to a friend. And I thought, that would be so dull. I couldn't do it. I mean, but yet, we've got, Cider House Rules and Garp and all those extraordinary books. But I couldn't do it because, as Guy says, how do you know until you've written it? How do you know what it is? How do you know what those characters are going to do? So that's my way.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
You mentioned yesterday in the library that you often have visitors from your characters. And I just wanted to comment on that for
Visitors, yes, my imaginary friends who I spend all my time with. Yes, but deeply disturbing.
A boy who never grew up.
Yeah, that's right. Deeply disturbing for many people. Yes, but beyond that, I also write in a hut that has its own personality. There's sort of an entity in it as well. I should write horror, really, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. Yes, I mean, obviously, I'm not certifiable, and I don't actually see them. But there is often a sense, especially as they start to take shape, of who they are. And I think I was talking about it yesterday in the workshop, that there are occasions when they just dictate. And those are those moments Guy's talking about when you're just doing this, trying to keep up. I'm a terrible typist as well, so I suddenly throw that aside and grab a pen because I'm quicker, taking the notes you need to take. So, yeah, the visitations are interesting.
That's actually one of my favorite things about writing, is when a character who you meant to be a minor temporary walk-on character suddenly takes on a life of their own and demands that they're in more scenes. I love when that happens, and I hate it too. I do actually outline, or I don't outline, but I actually, when I do nonfiction books, I was just talking about the way I do fiction is discovery, but nonfiction I sort of have to follow a theme, and I do jump all over and write the separate chapters and then put them together. It does frustrate my publisher, though, because I usually pitch the book as a one-page idea. I'm going to do a book of haunted hospitals. Maybe here are a couple of the locations I'm thinking of doing. Here's the demographics, here's the target market. And then I don't really start the book until well after the contract's in hand, etc. And the one interesting thing is the director of marketing at Dundurn always contacts me and says, can you give me an idea of like some of the places that are going to be in the book? And I went, oh, shoot, I better come up with some fast. I quickly put together a Google document with, location, name of the place, etc., and go, okay, I think here are the 40 places that I'll be writing about. They may change. But I always frustrate the marketing department because even in the nonfiction, it's a very loose plan.
I'm going to make a comment because I'm finding this very interesting and what people are saying too. And I haven't thought this through. It's the first time I've thought along these lines. But I wonder if the figuring it out as you go, discovering it as you're writing tribe, and the outline it, block it out and know where you're going. So the story you've already heard and you're telling a friend. If some of that has to do with tolerance for anxiety. And what I mean by that is, writing any creativity is I suspect everyone in this room knows this, can be a brutally anxiety-provoking exercise. You're confronting inadequacy, you're confronting your own limitations, and it is possible that for some people, the act of making an outline, of knowing when you sit down in the morning, you look at your note and you know what the task that day is. You even know what the task next month will be because the outline is there. It's a way of guiding you into your work by tamping down that stress level of anxiety. And for others, and for me, I know this, I get to the desk in the morning and I think, God, you've got to be smarter than you really are today, because you have to figure out what's coming next and you don't have a clue. And the adrenaline, the endorphins, the adrenaline, the energy, I actually find that anxiety pushes me harder to try to make something happen. That's the Graham Greene thing about saying he gets bored if it knows where it's going, and other people can get panicked if they don't know where it's going. And there may be, I haven't thought this through, but there may be some distinction of that sort to be made.
A number of years ago, Brandon Sanderson was one of our guests, and he actually talked about this in a 2-hour panel about mappers and people who just fly by the seat of their pants. And he had a lot of people, there's a lot of people who do that. There's a lot of people who have problems doing that with anxiety and stress. So yes, it's quite a complex question that I think each person has to make up for themselves. Anyways, we have more questions.
Hello, my name is Yurain Lee. I'm actually a writer, but first and foremost, I'm a visual artist. And I also teach once a week at one of the schools, art. And when I teach my kids from kindergarten to grade 6, I always tell them don't plan. Like, of course, they're going to follow my steps. But with anything I do creatively, whether it's writing or my visual art, I always just let the emotions and feelings come out. And if the kids want to go their own direction, I'm always open to that, because I find it very hard for someone to say, oh, it has to be this way. And the only time I ever set up my writing, structured way was when I was in university and I had to write essays, because then you have to follow what the teacher wants. You can't always do it how you want. So creatively now, as a writer and an artist, I don't plan anything. I don't even know what's going to happen. When people look at my artwork or they read my poetry, they're like, how'd you do this? How'd you write all this? I said, I don't know. I just, whatever comes out, comes out. And I think that's even more fun than sitting there analyzing. Otherwise, it becomes even more stressful.
Thank you. Actually, that's a good point, is to get what you get. I know just for me, when I have to write articles and things, I usually just do a brain dump and then worry about where it has to fit and get it physically on the page, and then you can worry about if maybe one paragraph or something has to move. Do we have any other questions?
Okay, this is for you, Mark. Have you actually experienced a haunting yourself, and do you believe in these ghosts?
Yeah, I think everyone should answer this question. But I used to say I'm the biggest chicken you'll ever meet, but I had never seen a ghost or I'd never experienced anything paranormal. Thank God, because I probably need diapers. However, there were 2 weird experiences. One in Halifax at a hotel. Something weird happened to me, and just a couple weeks ago. Liz and I were driving back from Romance Writers of America, and we were staying in a hotel in West Virginia, to visit the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, because I'd written about it, but I'd never visited. So it was a great opportunity on our way back from Orlando on this long trip to do a couple overnights and explore. And so we were at this, to set the scene, we were driving through the mountains, and it was very foggy, and it was midnight, and the first hotel we stopped at was completely booked. The second hotel we finally found down the highway, there was one room left. And you wonder why it was never used. No, there was one room left, and it was just like 2 double beds. And we're like, we don't care, let's just go. We'll sleep here, because we wanted to go on the tour in the morning and then obviously do the next 12 hours to get back to Hamilton. And in the middle of the night, we were sleeping in separate beds. In the middle of the night, I heard Liz get up, and I heard her shuffle to the bathroom. And I thought I saw her go to the bathroom. And I was waiting for the light to turn on, and she never turned the bathroom light on. And as I was laying there waiting to see the light come on and thinking, that's weird, and I could hear her breathing in the bed beside me. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit, because in a previous hotel we had been in on the trip, it was not as nice of a hotel, and we'd actually put furniture in front of the door because we were worried someone was going to break in. So I immediately, woke and went, oh my God, there's someone's in here. Someone's snooping around in here. And I checked, and I could still see the latch on the door was closed. And I thought, okay, you're just panicking, go back to sleep. And then about half an hour later, I heard something like drop on the table at the end of my bed, like something. And again, I'm thinking, oh my God, someone's stealing my passport, they're stealing my wallet, whatever. And I looked, and I thought, well, maybe there's a connecting room, maybe someone is in the room, and the doorways between hotel rooms, but there was none. I checked, and I was like, okay, no, there's no one here. So yeah, go back to bed. And then in the morning, I as we were getting ready, I said, did you get up and go to the washroom in the middle of the night? Could have sworn I heard and saw you go. She said, no, I was like dead asleep, except for this one weird thing that happened. And she was really tired and cold, so she had her hoodie on and had pulled over her head and was like curled up facing the wall. And she felt someone standing over her, and then something touch her on the shoulder. And she thought someone was in the room and had broken in. So she immediately spun around, because she's feisty, was going to, deck them. And there was no one there. But she was convinced it was a woman who was in the room. And so it was kind of freaky that the two of us felt like there was a woman walking around the room. Apart from the fact that I thought there was maybe someone who broke in, I wasn't afraid of the woman. I was afraid if I thought it was like a burglar or someone trying to come in and whatever. But we felt like there was just a woman, a presence there. And that was the only really freaky thing that happened. Yeah, of course, I immediately went on Google and I did some searches and I posted. And I am going to continue to research. I talked to the staff in the morning to say, does anyone ever record anything? Like room 511, has anyone ever reported anything? But I am curious, because I'm gonna keep posting. I'm gonna see if I can put something in the local paper and say, has anyone experienced anything strange in this Econo Lodge? Because she was just so present that I'm sure we're not the only ones. So that was kind of eerie and freaky. Yeah, the Econo Lodge horror.
If you like ghost stories, you should check out Abingdon, Virginia, because that's close to where I live, and they do ghost tours every Halloween.
Oh, I love those.
Yeah,
those are my favorite.
There's all kinds of stories about haunted places where we live down there in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia.
Thank you.
The only thing that I've kind of experienced, my grandfather passed away about 5 years ago, and he and my grandma, I used to call them Spit and Hiss, because they were like two cats that kept just like spitting and hissing at each other all the time for they were married 60 some years. And I was sitting there at the kitchen table with my grandma, and she said something, I don't even remember what it was, not so nice about my grandpa. And this is after he had died. And as soon as she stopped speaking, this wind just howled around the house and around the front door. And that was almost like he was yelling back at her, even though he wasn't there. So that's probably like the most paranormal thing that I have ever experienced.
What about you guys?
I tend not to be. I'm fairly rational, I think, about all this. However, I also come from a family that's not, and so my mum passed away 3 years ago now, at the age of 98. She was still all there and just decided. She was one of those. She was Norwegian, very determined. former Ms. Oslo who became a spy during the war. So formidable. My wife, my poor wife, was very intimidated by her, she said, because there's this tall former Ms. Oslo spy. Anyway, so my mum was quite formidable. She and I had a connection. They moved to Spain when I was 18, so I didn't actually see that much of them over the years. But my mum always said that wherever I was in the world, and I moved around a lot, she always felt she knew what I was up to and what I was feeling. She said that when I was born, she felt she knew me straight away, because in my first cry, she heard her father's laugh, which I think is a fairly spooky thing to say to your child. But anyway, so she died in, 3.5 years ago. And last summer, I was in my hut, and I'm an occasional Buddhist, if that's a possible thing. Anyway, I was chanting I was doing some Buddhist chanting. And in this particular form that I do, there's a sort of silent prayer where you remember your dead. And I was rushing into brunch or something, and I was in a bit of a hurry. So I was going, I remember Mum, I remember Dad. And then I realized it was Mother's Day. So I thought, I better stop and just remember Mum a little more clearly today, since she died. It was the year before, actually. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to remember my mother. And as soon as I went, I'm remembering my mother, there was a tap, 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 tap on the chimney. Now, this has never happened before, never happened since. I went, is that you, Mum? Tap, 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 tap. And I went, right, there's a squirrel, obviously. So I got up, went out the door, looked up the chimney, nothing. Came back inside. I said, are you there? Tap, 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 tap. Never tapped unless I asked a question. And I said, well, I bet you're, because she was pretty bored by 98, right? She was like, done. That's why she called it. She just decided it's time. And, formidable, as I say. And so I said, well, I bet you're a lot happier now, eh? Tap, 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 tap. And I said, well, thanks for coming. Tap, tap, tap. Gone.
You should have said 2 taps for yes, 1
tap. Yep, right. Yeah. I thought I wouldn't bug her. So that was that, yes.
Do we have any other questions?
Sure. This one's kind of for Sam mostly, but anyone can answer after, I guess. In university, I've been writing a lot of fiction, and took that more sort of shorter because of the time I have to write anyway. And I've been to some creative writing courses and stuff like that, and competitions and whatnot. But some of my professors, they emphasize really strongly, definitely the first few chapters, to reduce or almost eliminate to be verbs. I don't know if anyone knows that term, to be, like was, am, are, being, stuff like that. And I've been trained so much that I've written like chapters without even mentioning the word was, very, very active voice. And I was wondering, like, when you receive a manuscript, is it on your mind that someone says was like 10 times on a page, but it works, or how important is that kind of
I feel like if you're writing a thriller, there's very little passive constructions like that. But there are a lot of literary writers that will say there was this thing, or there are forms of to be, right?
Or not to be.
That is the question.
Yes.
All
together now.
So, I don't. I'm not sure who these professors are exactly. Are they writing genre stuff or literary stuff?
Well, in just one of my creative courses, I think they're just trying to train us not to be that.
I think it's great to be aware of it, but I feel like sometimes, how it's great to learn the rules so you can break them. I feel that it might be a step where you kind of need to know it, and then later on you can make that decision for yourself. But I don't think that. I know that if you read a James Bond book, there's never going to be a quiet moment, So it depends on where you fit into the spectrum of literary and commercial writing. So I think that's my answer. Yeah, I'm not looking for that. If you notice the people that I read, I'm looking for something. I'm looking for something to respond to emotionally. So I have a very diverse group of people whose work I love. If I don't love their work, I can't sell it, because I'm actually a bad salesman, right? So I'm the kind of guy where if you're like, sell me this, I'm like, yeah, I don't care about it. I'm just going to say, yeah, here you go. Have fun with it. But if I go in front of somebody and I say, I read this thing, I really loved it, I cried, I was so moved by it, you're going to be moved by it, then they'll say, oh, I'll take a look at it. So my job is to be the the kind of early adopter, right? I'm going to be the one that says, if I like it, I know I can get somebody else to like it, even though in the modern world, I'm getting worse and worse and worse at it, because I used to be like, 2/3 of the books 10 years ago I could sell. Now it's more like half, because the market is that tough.
I will say, too, that I used to work in a newspaper, and they, as a journalist, at least in the United States, it might be different here in Canada, we're trained to write stories for people who read at a third grade level, which is very simple, basic, what, when, where, who, why, the facts are the facts. And it's different. Every kind of writing has a different style. For journalistic writing, we do what's called the inverted pyramid. Like you picture a big upside down pyramid, and the most important facts are at the top of your story, and then as your story goes down, you put the less important facts. And to go back to what Sam was saying too, it doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah, you want to use action, strong verbs like crush or slap or slam. Instead of the door was open, you could say, she slammed the door, because that conveys more emotion. But it really is all about your voice, too. I mean, like you said, there has to be something in there that, makes the reader want to keep going and wants to find out more about your characters, whether that's, passive voice or active voice. And, I took some creative writing courses in college, some poetry and stuff like that, and I haven't gotten a lot out of those courses in comparison to real-world publishing, but I write genre fiction, so if you're going for more of a literary style, it might be different. But, I think first of all, you have to write for yourself, because no one's going to write your book for you. And really, in real life, people don't always use active verbs all the time. We talk in a lot of passive sentences. And if you try not to use passive voice, it can be kind of difficult to read sometimes, I think.
One of the problems that often comes up in early drafts or younger writers' work is missing the line between eliciting an emotion and forcing the emotion. And a lot of the time it has to do with lack of confidence. That you, the writer, are feeling that this is an intense, emotional, dramatic moment, and damn it, you're going to make sure the reader feels the same way. So the solution is often to ratchet up the ante of the language, to use more forceful words, to add an adjective, because you are so keen to make the other person feel the way you feel, that the inexperience often causes that pushing. And we're the same way when we meet somebody, that the person who is trying too hard is an aspect of interpersonal interaction. We can all recognize and identify the person who's trying too hard. And the same thing will apply in art, and it will happen more often to the person whose confidence level in their material and themselves, and I also often say, in the reader. One of the things I've stressed over the years, and I've been doing this for a ridiculously long time now, is I actually have to have a great deal of confidence in my reader. And the passage I read to you this afternoon requires confidence in the reader because it stops a novel cold. I have a feeling I can only get away with that because I'd done 12 books before this one, because I was 60 years old, because I sell. A young writer might not have tried that, or if they did try it, they might have been talked out of it by an editor or an agent because it's not conventionally the way we normally go. The problem with that thinking, and Sam and I can have a few drinks about it tonight, and I suspect you'll agree with me though, is that the problem with that is that you end up encouraging and propagating homogeneity. You end up with works that are almost invariably not going to be as bad as some writing used to be, because writers have taken courses, have done workshops, had the worst traits of the process trained out of them. And you end up with a narrowing band of what everybody has been taught to do. There's some value, I'm going to suggest, to not following those guidelines religiously unless what you want to do is fit within that narrowing band. And if you do, then you're in the same situation, and Chris and I talked about this last night, where the most useful workshops are often screenwriting workshops. The reason for that is because screenwriting is an intensely formulaic process. Because you're pitching your screenplay to producers whose jobs are on the line if they buy something that doesn't work. And they have been taught the 3-act structure, the process of how a film will work. And so for the writer aiming at that target, it makes sense to learn what the rules are of a 90-minute or 110-minute screenplay. Fiction should be a much bigger tent, I would argue. And that means that in your own creative process, don't get locked in to the way that the norms appear to be at a given moment. For one thing, they may be different 3 years from now. Chasing last year's success is one of the biggest problems we all run into in film and television, in books. So I'm going to make a plea to some degree to try to trust yourself and your own method of doing something, rather than look for rubrics or rules or formulas from people who will say, I know the secret. Nobody actually knows the secret for you.
What is all your greatest advice for aspiring writers?
Pick another profession.
I just gave mine, so I'm going to pass it over.
Wow. Write, and write again. It's all you can do. Yeah. I don't tend to put. When I started out as a writer, I had various injunctions which I pinned on a corkboard above my desk, but they're so ingrained in me now. I don't have a space for a corkboard because I sit in the middle of a room. But one of the ones I had, and one of the ones I keep reminding myself of, because I'm only really happy when I'm writing, and when I'm not writing, there's a large part of me missing, and I keep reminding myself what James Joyce said, which is, "Write, you fool. What else are you good for?"
Patience, practice, and persistence are the 3 Ps of writing success. Again, it's write every. If you're not writing every day, writing every day in here. Keeping at it, keep working on your craft, and the more you write, the better you will get. And patience is critical for success. There is a quote, since we're throwing quotes out, that I actually still keep near my writing space by Hugh Prather, and the quote is, "If the desire to write is not accompanied by actual writing, then the desire is not to write." You have to actually write if you want to be a writer.
I'm going to be a little more practical. So my advice to people is, if you aren't part of a writing group, join a writing group, create a writing group, because you get lots of benefits from that, especially if you're unpublished or new and you're trying to figure this out. So the first thing you get, often these are groups that meet, weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or whatever, and they share work with each other, and you get this kind of, you get feedback. So that's the first thing you get. The second thing you get is a sense of community. So you get a group, and you make friends that way. And I feel like there's used to be a third thing that I've forgotten now, but there is a third thing. And
that's the most important thing.
That's the most important thing. And the other thing, there's actually a fourth thing, which I've found from my groups, which is that sometimes what happens is, if you watch the group over time, somebody will get an agent and get published, and the next person will get an agent, and then all of a sudden, the group tends to evolve at a kind of, or every writer in the group tends to evolve at a kind of similar pace, and then the next thing you know, it's upsetting. There was one writer that I represented that was part of such a group, and her best friend in the group got like a 6-figure 3-book deal with a major house, and I kind of knew from what she was writing that she wouldn't get that she would be lucky if we got a 1-book deal for a reasonable advance. But she said, "Oh, now that it's happening, it's going to happen to all of us." And I said, "Well, I say that sometimes, but it depends completely on the group." So anyway, that's my 2 seconds of advice.
I always tell people to have fun with their writing. I mean, as much as you can have fun, without tearing your hair out as you're writing. But, the fact is no one is going to sit down and write your book for you. So, don't try to write a zombie book if you don't like zombies just because, The Walking Dead is super popular right now. Don't chase the trends. I mean, write the book that you want to write, that you're interested in. Write the kind of book that you want to read. If there's something out there like, I want to write about unicorns who go into space and, colonize Mars or whatever, well then, by golly, you write about unicorns who go colonize Mars because that's what you're passionate about. And you're going to have more fun with it, and it's going to show in the finished product, and that's where you're going to find your voice, to get your agent and get your editor. So I always say just have fun with it.